I'm William, 38 male. I live alone in a small suburban apartment that used to feel like a temporary stop but now feels like a permanent cage. For 15 years, I was a senior data analyst for a large tech firm, a job that was as stable as it was predictable until it wasn't. This story is about how I lost that stability, my life savings, and nearly my sanity, all because I trusted the one person I thought I could never doubt, my own brother. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The day I was laid off felt surreal. One moment I was fine-tuning a predictive model for quarterly user engagement, and the next I was in a sterile conference room with an HR representative I'd never seen before, listening to phrases like corporate restructuring and synergistic realignment. They were just fancy words for "you're fired." They handed me a folder containing my severance package details, a sum that after 15 years of loyalty felt both substantial and insulting. It was enough to keep me afloat for a year, maybe a year and a half if I was careful. It was my safety net, the cushion that was supposed to protect me while I figured out my next move. I walked out of that building in a daze, clutching the folder like a life raft. The first person I called was my younger brother, Jacob. He was always the charismatic one, the dreamer. While I was climbing the corporate ladder one rung at a time, Jacob was always chasing the next big thing. He'd had a string of ventures: a gourmet food truck, an app for local dog walkers, a subscription box for artisanal coffee. None had ever truly taken off, but he always sold them with such unshakable confidence that you couldn't help but believe him. "Will's bad news, huh?" he said, his voice brimming with an odd sort of energy. "Listen, this is a sign. The universe is pushing you towards something better." I just wanted sympathy, maybe an offer to grab a beer and complain about the soulless nature of corporations. Instead, I got a sales pitch, but I was vulnerable and Jacob knew it. He insisted on coming over that night. He arrived with a bottle of expensive scotch, a celebratory gesture that felt wildly inappropriate, and a leather-bound binder. He looked sharp in a tailored blazer, a stark contrast to my crumpled work shirt and the dazed look I'm sure was plastered on my face. "This, my brother," he announced, tapping the binder with a flourish, "is Innovest, and it's going to change everything." For the next 2 hours, Jacob painted a picture of a revolutionary fintech platform. He used all the right buzzwords: AI-driven, blockchain-integrated, disruptive technology. Innovest was supposed to be a micro-investment app for millennials, using a unique algorithm to identify and invest in emerging global markets with guaranteed high returns. He showed me charts, graphs, and projections that all pointed skyward. It was slick, professional, and incredibly convincing. He claimed he had a team of developers ready to go and a few angel investors circling. But he needed a significant seed investment to get the project off the ground and secure the bigger players. My sister Sophia called in the middle of his presentation. She was always the grounded one, the pragmatist. When I told her I was with Jacob and he was pitching me a business idea, I could almost hear her eyes roll through the phone. "William, be careful," she warned. "You know how he gets. Don't make any decisions right now. Just breathe." I should have listened, but Jacob had an answer for everything. When I questioned the risk, he pointed to a section in his plan about a proprietary risk mitigation protocol. When I asked about his team, he named a few impressive-sounding individuals I'd never heard of. "I need $150,000, Will," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential tone. "That's the exact amount of your severance. It's fate. This isn't just an investment in a business. It's an investment in me, in us, in our family." He looked me dead in the eye, his expression a perfect blend of passion and sincerity. "I guarantee you, William, within 18 months you'll see a tenfold return, guaranteed." Word hung in the air, guaranteed. In my world of data and probabilities, nothing was ever guaranteed, but I wasn't in my world anymore. I was in a world of fear and uncertainty. The stability I had built my life on had vanished. Jacob wasn't just offering an investment, he was offering hope. He was offering me a way to take control, to turn this catastrophic setback into a monumental victory. He made it sound like we were a team, that my loss was actually our shared opportunity. My friend David, a financial advisor, had always warned me about mixing family and money. "It's the quickest way to ruin both," he'd said on more than one occasion. His advice echoed in the back of my mind, but Jacob's voice was louder. He was my brother. He wouldn't lie to me. He wouldn't risk my entire future on a whim, or so I thought. That night, against every logical instinct I possessed and the warnings of the two most sensible people I knew, I agreed. The next morning, I went to the bank and transferred my entire severance, my entire safety net, to the corporate account for Innovest Technologies, Inc. Jacob hugged me, his eyes shining with what I mistook for grateful tears. "You won't regret this," he promised. "This is the start of our new life." He was right about one thing. It was the start of a new life, but it was nothing like the one he had described. The first 6 months were a blur of excitement and optimism. Jacob was a master of managing expectations, at least in the short term. He sent me weekly progress reports filled with encouraging, if vague, updates. Had a breakthrough with the UI/UX team, one email would read. Potential strategic partnership in the pipeline, can't share details yet, but it's huge, another would claim. He even sent me a link to a sleek but non-functional beta version of the app. It looked professional, and clicking through the placeholder menus gave me a thrill. I was a co-founder, a silent partner in a cutting-edge tech startup. I felt important again. I'd call him for more specifics, and he was always ready with an answer. The developers were based in Eastern Europe to save on costs, which was why communication was sometimes stilted. The angel investors were waiting for the completion of the beta phase before wiring their funds. Every question I had was met with a plausible, reassuring explanation. He was so good at it that he made my caution feel like foolish pessimism. Sophia remained skeptical. Every time we spoke, she would ask, "Have you seen any actual numbers, William? A bank statement? A single line of code?" I'd brush her off, telling her she didn't understand the startup world. "You have to spend money to make money," I'd parrot, using one of Jacob's favorite lines. "These things take time." My friend David was more direct. "Will, have you seen a cap table? Do you have your ownership stake documented in a legally binding shareholder agreement?" he asked during one of our lunches. I admitted I didn't. I had the wire transfer receipt and a simple investment agreement Jacob had drafted himself, which David later called less binding than a handshake. But I trusted Jacob. He was my brother. The paperwork was just a formality we'd get to later. The first real crack in the facade appeared around the 8-month mark. Jacob's updates started becoming less frequent. When I'd call, he would sound stressed, blaming unforeseen bugs and regulatory hurdles. The confident, charismatic entrepreneur was replaced by a man who was constantly putting out fires. The promised launch date came and went. Jacob assured me it was a minor delay, just a couple of weeks to iron out some final issues. Those weeks turned into a month, then two. My savings account, which I'd been living on since the investment, was starting to look dangerously low. The pressure was mounting. I started applying for jobs again, but the market was tough for someone in their late 30s who'd been out of the game for nearly a year. I landed a few interviews, but nothing panned out. The rejections stung, but I kept telling myself it didn't matter. Soon, Innovest would launch and I wouldn't need a job. The day it all collapsed was a Tuesday. I remember it because the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, a cruel contrast to the storm that was about to break over my life. Jacob had been dodging my calls for a week. I finally drove to the small co-working space he claimed to be renting for the Innovest headquarters. The receptionist looked at me with a confused expression when I asked for Jacob or his company. "Innovest? No one by that name here," she said, checking her directory. "We had a Jacob rent a hot desk for a few months, but he stopped coming in about 6 weeks ago. Left without paying his last month, actually." A cold dread washed over me. I sat in my car, my heart pounding in my chest, and called him again and again. Finally, he picked up. His voice was hollow, defeated. "It's over, Will," he whispered. "It's all gone." The story he spun was a tragedy of epic proportions. The Eastern European developers were a scam. They took a huge chunk of the money and delivered unusable code. A key angel investor pulled out at the last minute, causing a domino effect. He claimed he'd poured every last cent into trying to salvage the project, even selling his car, but it was no use. The money was gone, all of it. My $150,000 had vanished into a black hole of bad luck and betrayal by others. He sobbed on the phone, apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry, William, I lost it all. I wanted this to work for us so badly." He sounded genuine. Lie heartbroken, and a part of me, the part that had known and loved him my whole life, felt a pang of pity. He was a victim, just like me. We had been scammed together. But another part of me, the logical, data-driven part, was screaming. It didn't add up. The perfect excuses, the co-working space lie, the way he had isolated me from any real details. I went home that day a broken man. I had no job, no savings, and no future. My severance, my one shot at security, had been incinerated. That night, I sat in the dark of my apartment, surrounded by bills I couldn't pay, and the pity I felt for my brother slowly began to curdle into a cold, hard knot of suspicion. The betrayal was complete. The bottom had fallen out, and I was in freefall. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I was paralyzed by a mixture of shame, grief, and annoying, ever-present anxiety. I ignored calls from Sophia and David, too humiliated to admit the full extent of the disaster. How could I tell them that I, the careful, analytical one, had been so monumentally stupid? I spent my days aimlessly scrolling through job boards and my nights staring at the ceiling, the same question playing on a loop in my head: how did this happen? Jacob, for his part, played the role of the shattered dreamer perfectly. He was too devastated to see anyone, communicating only through text messages filled with self-flagellation and apologies. He framed it as our shared tragedy. He had lost his dream and I had lost my money. In his narrative, we were both casualties. But the inconsistencies kept nagging at me. The lie about the office space was a small thing, but it was a deliberate deception. Why lie about something so trivial if the rest of the story was true? My analyst brain, dormant for months, began to wake up. I needed data, I needed facts. The first step was to find the binder. After Jacob's initial pitch, I had stored it away in a closet, a symbol of my bright new future. Now it felt more like a tombstone. I finally pulled the box down, dust motes dancing in the dim light of my apartment. There it was, the leather-bound proposal for Innovest, its glossy pages still pristine. I sat at my kitchen table and began to read through it, not as a hopeful investor, but as a forensic investigator. This time I wasn't dazzled by the buzzwords. I was looking for holes, and I found them. The market projections were absurdly optimistic, citing sources that were either outdated or irrelevant. The proprietary algorithm was described in a circular logic paragraph that said nothing of substance. The biographies of the supposed team were generic, with no last names or professional links. It was a masterpiece of illusion, all style and no substance. The shame burned hotter. It was so obvious now. How had I not seen it? I spent hours poring over the document, my anger growing with every page. Then I got to the appendix, which contained the detailed technical specifications and the core business model. Something about the phrasing, the specific cadence of the technical jargon felt familiar. As a data analyst, I'd read hundreds of white papers and startup proposals over the years. This one triggered a faint memory, a ghost of a document I'd seen before. I couldn't place it. It was like trying to remember a dream. Frustrated, I decided to take a more direct approach. I started typing key phrases from the business plan into a search engine. I tried variations of AI-driven micro-investment platform, blockchain risk mitigation protocol, and other standout terms from the proposal. The first few pages of results were just a sea of generic fintech articles and ads. I was about to give up, to chalk it up to a tired mind playing tricks on me. Then I tried something different. I took one of the most specific jargon-filled sentences from the technical appendix, a long, convoluted description of the data routing process, and put the entire sentence in quotation marks, forcing an exact match search. I hit enter. One result. It was a link to a tech news article from 4 years ago. The headline read, "Connect Invest shuts down, how the startup darling burned through $20 million in 18 months." My blood ran cold. I clicked the link. The article detailed the spectacular rise and fall of a once promising fintech startup called Connect Invest. They had a charismatic founder, a slick pitch, and a guaranteed AI-driven model. They had raised millions in venture capital before it all imploded due to a flawed concept, massive overspending, and what the article delicately termed managerial irregularities. My eyes scanned the article, my heart hammering against my ribs, and then I saw it. Embedded in the article was a link to a post-mortem analysis written by a former employee, which included excerpts from the original Connect Invest business plan. I clicked, a PDF loaded, and there it was, page after page of familiar text, the market projections. The graphs, the team bios with different names but identical descriptions, and word for word the entire technical appendix. Jacob hadn't written a business plan, he had plagiarized one. He hadn't created a new, innovative idea. He had taken the blueprint of a famous failed company, changed the name from Connect Invest to Innovest, and passed it off as his own genius. He hadn't just been overly optimistic, he had knowingly sold me a bill of goods based on a proven failure. The binder in front of me was no longer a symbol of my stupidity, it was evidence. The ghost in the blueprint wasn't a figment of my imagination, it was the ghost of a dead company, and my brother had used it to rob me. The pity I felt for him vanished, replaced by a cold, clear rage. This wasn't a shared tragedy. This was a calculated deception, it was fraud, and I had the proof right in front of me. The discovery of the plagiarized business plan was like a key turning in a lock. Suddenly, I had a new sense of purpose. The fog of depression and shame began to lift, replaced by the sharp clarity of anger. I wasn't a victim of circumstance anymore. I was the target of a deliberate, calculated con, and the perpetrator was my own brother. My first instinct was to call Jacob and confront him, to scream at him until my voice was raw, but I stopped myself. A messy, emotional confrontation would get me nowhere. He would just deny it, twist the story, and paint me as the crazy, grieving brother. He was good at that. No, if I was going to do this, I needed to be smarter. I needed more than just a plagiarized document. I needed a complete picture of his deception. My time as an analyst had taught me one thing: data tells the real story. It was time to start collecting it. My first call was to David, my financial advisor friend. I finally swallowed my pride and laid out the entire story, from the layoff to the wire transfer to the discovery of the Connect Invest plan. I expected him to say, "I told you so," but he just listened patiently. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Will, this is bad," he said, his voice grim. "This is wire fraud territory. The fact that he used an interstate wire transfer for funds obtained under false pretenses, that's a federal offense." David's words sent a shiver down my spine. This was more serious than I had even realized. He gave me a list of things I needed to find: bank statements for the Innovest corporate account, any correspondence where Jacob explicitly guaranteed returns, and any proof of where the money actually went. "Con artists don't just lose money," David explained. "They move it. Your $150,000 didn't just evaporate, it went somewhere." The next call was to my sister, Sophia. Her reaction was the opposite of David's calm analysis. It was pure, unadulterated fury. "I knew it," she yelled. "I knew there was something wrong with him. William, I am so sorry I didn't push harder." Her anger on my behalf was validating, washing away some of my remaining shame. She told me something crucial. Jacob had been complaining to her about his high-interest debt for months before my layoff. He had apparently gotten himself into a deep financial hole with some shady online lenders. Suddenly, my severance package looked less like a seed investment and more like a personal bailout. Armed with this new information, I began my investigation in earnest. The first challenge was the Innovest bank account. I had no legal access to it, but I remembered something. During his pitch, Jacob had triumphantly shown me the first official company deposit, a $1,000 check from one of his early believers. He had proudly displayed the deposit slip, which had the full account number on it. I had taken a picture of it, feeling like a supportive brother. I found the photo deep in my camera rolls. I couldn't access the statements, but I could try to track the flow of funds from my end. I went to my bank and spoke with a manager, explaining that I suspected I was a victim of fraud. While they couldn't give me information on the receiving account, they could trace my wire transfer. The money had landed in the Innovest account at a major national bank as expected. What happened after that was the mystery. My real breakthrough came from a less conventional source: social media. I began digging into Jacob's online presence, not his carefully curated public profile, but the digital breadcrumbs he might have left behind. I found his Venmo account. His transactions were public. I started scrolling back month by month. There were the usual small transactions: pizza with friends, movie tickets. But then, in the weeks and months after I transferred him my severance, the pattern changed. I found large, regular payments to two individuals I didn't recognize. The memos were vague: consulting fee, project expense. Then I saw payments to a luxury car rental company, a payment to a high-end watch retailer, a transaction with the memo Vegas trip deposit. My hands were shaking as I cross-referenced the names he'd paid with the list of the development team from his proposal. There was no match. These weren't developers. I did a quick search on the names. One was a nightclub promoter. The other appeared to be his landlord for a new, much nicer apartment he'd apparently moved into, something he'd failed to mention. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening speed. The scam by the European developers was a lie. The regulatory hurdles were a fiction. My brother hadn't invested my money in a business. He had used it to fund a lavish lifestyle and pay off his personal debts. He had treated my life savings like his own personal slush fund. The final piece of the puzzle was the most damning. I remembered the name of the failed startup, Connect Invest. I went back to the news articles about its collapse. The founder, a charismatic but reckless entrepreneur named Kevin Sterling, had been sued by his investors. I found the court documents online. As I read through the list of creditors and expenses, a detail caught my eye. Kevin Sterling had a younger brother who had worked at the company in a minor marketing role. His brother's name wasn't Jacob, but the connection felt too strong to be a coincidence. On a hunch, I searched for any link between Jacob and Kevin Sterling. It took some digging, but I found it. A photo from a tech conference 5 years ago. There was Kevin Sterling, founder of Connect Invest, with his arm around a much younger, star-struck-looking man. My brother Jacob, he hadn't just found the business plan online, he knew the source. He had seen the whole disaster unfold up close. He knew exactly how and why it had failed, and he still chose to replicate it, to use its fraudulent blueprint to deceive me. This wasn't just plagiarism, it was a premeditated, intimately understood fraud. He knew the bomb was a dud before he lit the fuse. With the full, ugly picture of Jacob's deception laid bare, my grief was completely consumed by a cold, methodical rage. He hadn't just taken my money. He had exploited my trust, my vulnerability, and our lifelong bond as brothers. He had watched me lose my career and then, with a smile, pushed me off a financial cliff. An apology wasn't going to cut it. A simple repayment plan wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the same humiliation and desperation he had inflicted on me. I wanted justice, and I realized I would have to be its architect. I gathered all my evidence, the printed Ininvest and Connect Invest business plans side by side, screenshots of Jacob's Venmo transactions, the photo of him with Kevin Sterling, a detailed timeline of his lies cross-referenced with his spending. I put it all into a new binder, a stark counterpoint to the glossy proposal he had used to fool me. This was my binder of truth. I called David again and walked him through my findings. "You've built a powerful case, Will," he said, audibly impressed. "With this, a prosecutor would have a field day, but going the legal route is long, expensive, and the outcome is never certain. Even if he's found guilty, you might never see a dime, especially if he's spent it all." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm not interested in a lengthy court battle. I don't want to just win, I want to make a point. I want to dismantle the facade he's built his entire life on." David paused. "What do you have in mind?" My plan had started as a simple seed of an idea but had grown into something far more elaborate. Jacob's power came from his charisma, his ability to sell a dream and make people believe in him. His entire identity was built on the image of being a brilliant, up-and-coming entrepreneur. To expose him, I had to shatter that image in front of the very people he sought to impress. My first step was to identify his audience. Who was he still trying to fool? Sophia told me he had recently started talking to our extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, about his next big venture. He was already laying the groundwork for his next set of victims. He told them that Ininvest was a noble failure, a victim of market forces, but that he'd learned valuable lessons. He was even planning a big family dinner at our parents' house, a gathering that was ostensibly to reconnect, but which I now knew was a networking event for his next con. Our parents, bless their hearts, believed his every word and were proud of his resilience. That dinner would be my stage. Next, I needed to control the narrative. I spent a week creating a PowerPoint presentation. It sounds clinical, but it was the most emotional document I've ever created. My skills as a data analyst, which he had indirectly stripped from me, were now my greatest weapon. Slide 1, a title slide, Ininvest, a case study in deception. Slide 2, a picture of me and Jacob as kids, happy and smiling. The caption read, "Trust." Slide 3, a side-by-side comparison of the Ininvest and Connect Invest logos. Slides 410, detailed page-by-page comparisons of the plagiarized business plans, with identical passages highlighted in bright red. Slide 11, the photo of Jacob with Kevin Sterling, the founder of the failed company. Slides 12-15, a financial breakdown. One column showed the projected business expenses from his proposal. The next column showed his actual spending, documented by the Venmo screenshots and other evidence, the luxury car rentals, the watch, the Vegas trip, the new apartment. I titled this slide "Where the Investment Really Went." Slide 16, a quote from my wire transfer agreement where he guaranteed the investment's safety. Slide 17, a simple final slide with the legal definition of wire fraud. Sophia and David were my co-conspirators. Sophia's role was to ensure everyone was at the dinner. She called every aunt, uncle, and cousin, telling them how important it was to be there to support Jacob after his tough time. She played her part perfectly, her voice full of sympathy. David's role was advisory. He reviewed my presentation to ensure it was purely factual and not libelous. "Stick to what you can prove, Will," he advised. "The facts are damning enough, you don't need to add commentary." The final piece of my plan involved a bit of technical subterfuge. Jacob was intensely proud of his tech savviness. I knew he would want to show off a presentation for his next big thing. I bought a specific brand of USB flash drive, one that I knew he favored. I loaded my presentation onto it, and with Sophia's help, swapped it with the one in his laptop bag the day before the dinner. She visited him under the guise of dropping off a casserole, a perfect Trojan horse of sisterly concern. The night before the family dinner, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had transformed my pain into a meticulous plan. I was no longer the victim, I was the architect. Jacob thought he was walking into a room full of potential investors. In reality, he was walking into his own trial, and I was the prosecution, the judge, and the jury. The evening of the family dinner felt heavy with unspoken tension, at least for me, Sophia, and David, who had insisted on coming along as my moral support. For everyone else, it was a perfectly normal family gathering. The air was filled with the smell of my mom's roasted chicken and the sound of cheerful chatter. Aunts and uncles hugged me, offering condolences about my job and praising my resilience. Jacob told us how you two were in that business venture together, my uncle Robert said, clapping me on the shoulder. Tough break, but it's good to see you bouncing back. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Jacob was in his element, holding court in the center of the living room. He was dressed impeccably, looking every bit the visionary entrepreneur who had weathered a storm and emerged wiser. He spoke with a practiced humility, peppering his stories with lessons learned and future ambitions. He was charming, magnetic, and utterly repulsive. I watched him work the room, seeing not my brother but a predator grooming his next meal. Our parents looked at him with such pride, their hearts swelling at the sight of their brilliant son. It almost made me sick. After dinner, Jacob clapped his hands together, silencing the room. "All right, everyone, thank you all for coming," he began, a broad smile on his face. "It means the world to have your support. As most of you know, I've had a challenging year, but failure is the best teacher. And what I've learned has led me to my next project, something I truly believe will be revolutionary." This was it, the moment I had been planning for weeks. He walked over to the large flat-screen TV in the living room. "If you'll indulge me for just a few minutes, I'd like to give you a sneak peek." He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, my USB drive, and plugged it into the TV's port. He winked at me across the room, a gesture of partnership that now seemed like a taunt. William was my biggest believer in the last venture, and I know he'll be just as excited about this one. He turned back to the screen, clicking the remote. The TV flickered to life. But instead of a sleek logo for his new imaginary company, the title slide of my presentation appeared in stark white letters against a black background. Innovest, a case study in deception. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Jacob stared at the screen, his smile frozen on his face. He frantically clicked the remote, but nothing changed. I had disabled all other controls. "What is this?" he stammered, his face starting to pale. I stood up from my chair, my own remote in my hand. "I believe this is your presentation, Jacob," I said, my voice clear and steady, "but it seems you've misplaced your notes. Allow me." I clicked to the next slide. The picture of us as children appeared and the room fell silent. "This is about trust," I said, my eyes locked on his. "The trust I had in my brother." Then I began. I walked the entire family, our parents, our aunts, uncles, and cousins, through the whole sordid story. I clicked through the slides one by one, my voice never wavering. I showed them the side-by-side comparison of the plagiarized business plans. I showed them the photo of Jacob with the founder of the company that had already failed. With every slide, the color drained further from Jacob's face. The family's expressions shifted from confusion to shock, then to dawning horror. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth. My father, who had been looking at Jacob with such pride moments before, now stared at his son with a look of profound disappointment. The final section was the most brutal. I showed them the financial breakdown. "Jacob told us the investment was lost to scam artists and bad luck," I narrated, my voice cold as ice. "But here is where my $150,000 severance package actually went." I clicked through the evidence of his lies, the car rentals, the designer watch, the trips, the hidden apartment. The silence in the room was now absolute, broken only by a quiet gasp from my aunt. I ended on the final slide, the legal definition of wire fraud. I let it hang in the air for a long moment before turning the TV off. Jacob stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but found only looks of condemnation and disgust. This is a lie," he finally choked out, his voice cracking. "William is twisting everything. He's bitter because he lost his job. He's trying to ruin me." But his usual charisma was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked energy. His arguments were hollow. The evidence had been too clear, too overwhelming. My father, a man of few words, stood up. He looked at Jacob not with anger but with a deep, crushing sadness. "Is this true, Jacob? Did you do this to your brother?" Jacob opened his mouth but no words came out. He just stared, trapped in the web of his own deceit. In that moment, his entire identity, the carefully constructed facade of the brilliant entrepreneur, crumbled into dust. He wasn't a visionary, he was a fraud and a thief, and now everyone knew it. The presentation was over, the verdict was in. The aftermath of the final presentation was swift and devastating for Jacob. The family, once his captive audience, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. There were no more pats on the back, no more admiring glances. The dinner party ended abruptly in a funereal silence. Jacob fled the house without another word, his face ashen. He didn't just lose their respect, he lost his entire social and familial safety net, the very thing he relied on to launch his cons. My parents were heartbroken. My mother cried for days, mourning not the money but the broken bond between her sons. My father, in his quiet way, tried to broker a peace. He called me, suggesting that if Jacob agreed to a repayment plan, we could try to put this behind us. Dad, this was never about the money, I told him gently but firmly. I don't expect to see a single dollar of it again. This was about the truth. I can't have a relationship built on a foundation of lies like that. It was a hard conversation, but he eventually understood. He and my mother had to grapple with the reality that one of their sons had deliberately and cruelly victimized the other. As for Jacob, his life unraveled. With his supply of potential family investors cut off, his financial situation became dire. The landlord of his fancy apartment evicted him. He had to sell the watch. The last I heard from Sophia, he was living on a friend's couch trying and failing to find work. No one wanted to hire a business consultant with a reputation for fraud. He had become a pariah in the very circles he tried so desperately to impress. He sent me a single, rambling text message a few weeks later, a bizarre mix of apology, blame, and self-pity. He claimed I had ruined his life over a misunderstanding. I deleted it without replying. For me, the path forward was about rebuilding. The revenge had been satisfying, yes, but it didn't magically restore my bank account or erase the scars. It did, however, give me something I hadn't realized I'd lost: my confidence. By systematically taking Jacob's deception apart, I had reconnected with my own skills and instincts. I was an analyst. I was good at finding the truth in a sea of noise. With that renewed sense of self, I threw myself back into the job hunt. I updated my resume, not just with my old job title, but with a new project. Led a comprehensive forensic analysis of a fraudulent investment scheme, identifying key points of failure and material misrepresentation. It was a bold move, but it was the truth. During an interview for a risk management position at a reputable investment firm, the hiring manager raised an eyebrow at that line item. "Tell me about this," he said, intrigued. I spent the next 20 minutes walking him through the entire story, not as a bitter victim, but as a professional presenting a case study. I explained how I collected the data, identified the patterns of deception, and presented the evidence. I focused on the method, not the emotion. When I finished, the manager was silent for a moment. "So you took a personal catastrophe," he said, "and you turned it into a data-driven project to expose the person responsible, who also happened to be your brother." "Well, yes," I said. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You're hired." It's been a year now. I love my new job. It's challenging and rewarding, and my employers value my ability to see through deception. I reconnected with David, who now manages my much smaller but growing investment portfolio with an almost comical level of caution. My relationship with Sophia is stronger than ever. We weathered the storm together. Things with my parents are better, though a certain sadness lingers whenever Jacob's name comes up. I live in a new apartment, one that I can comfortably afford. It feels like a home, not a cage. Sometimes I think about that leather-bound binder of lies Jacob brought me. It represented the lowest point in my life. But the second binder, the one I created, represents my turning point. It's a reminder that even when you lose everything, you still have your integrity, your skills, and your strength. You can't always get back what was taken from you, but you can use the truth to build something new, something stronger from the rubble.